Welcome to reFRAMED, a podcast created to educate, encourage, and inspire parents and professionals. The Gladney Center for Adoption staff know parenting a child that has a history of loss, abuse, neglect, or trauma requires parenting skills and insight to be reframed in order to create a loving and caring environment. reFRAMED host Emily Morehead and guests strive to make an impact on our world through topics that are important to you, your family, and our communities. And now, here's your host, Emily Morehead.
Hi, and thank you for joining us for this episode of reFRAMED. We are striving to make an impact in our world through creating conversations about topics that are really important to you and yours. So I'm the host. My name is Emily Morehead. I work at Gladney as the research and curriculum supervisor. I am a mom, I'm a therapist, and I love to learn. And I have a really special guest for us today, Kathryn Nader, who is a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas and leads groups at the Warm Place, and will actually be going to private practice in January as well. So we will have your contact information on our show notes so people are able to find you as a resource and referral.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You led us in a really great conversation today about grief. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're so glad to have you here. Your training today was so impactful, and it left the room kind of churning for more. So there was a lot of great questions and conversations, and people left, I think, even with the tables, they kind of formed bonds through the conversations that you created. So we were so thankful. One of the things that you talked about today with grief was you can't fix it. And that is so difficult for us. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Grief, I think it's just such a big thing that a lot of people, when somebody dies in their family, they immediately want to find a way to do something.
Yeah.
And we're always looking to solve problems. So that's really how our culture is, or check something off of a list. And I think the hard thing with grief is there are no shortcuts. There's no easy fix it for ourselves or for our loved ones. We really just have to walk through it.
And that is hard because our culture is that we want to fix it, and there's a timeline, and this is how we do it. And so when you and I met, one of the things that I said to you was, you know, your work is so impactful with our children and our parents, but also just for our community, that your center, the Warm Place, is available and is a resource, and that you in this community using your voice to educate professionals is so important. I asked you if you had read a book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine, and you hadn't. Mm-hmm. It's such a good book in the grief world.
I can't wait to read it. I'm so excited.
So I have it for you today.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm giving you homework. I guess Yay. You gave us some homework today.
Yeah, sure.
But
thank
Megan,
you so much.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we talked a little bit about it earlier, and one of the things that we joked about was that a lot of times people just want to give you a book and try to fix it for you that way, and so I'm kind of laughing that I'm fixing it for you that way. But Megan Devine's work, one of her things that she says that lines up so much with what you said today was that some things can't be fixed, they can only be carried.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think that's so true. I think, we have to walk through the grief journey, and so a lot of times after a death, we just are learning how to carry it. Yeah. What does it look like to carry this loss? And who do I need to support me as I do carry it? And who can help me to carry that? So I think that's an awesome quote. I love that.
Yeah, we had a room full of 40 professionals today, and then about 40 people online that streamed with us. And something that really floored me, and I don't know, it kind of left a bad spot with me, was you asked the room, how do you explain death to a child? First off, really uncomfortable question.
Sure.
But what was crazy to me is that most of the people in that room were licensed professionals, and they didn't have an answer, and they're practicing. And so I think that really speaks to our world, our community. This is uncomfortable for us.
It is. Yeah.
So you gave us some practical steps today, in sharing that, but were you surprised by that response in the community?
I really wasn't, because I think you're right. I think we really don't talk about death, even though all of us knows that it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. It's an uncomfortable topic for us because we just don't talk about it. Mm-hmm. And I think explaining to kids, what death means, in a basic sense, we've never had to do that before. So I think a lot of people, it just makes them uncomfortable to think about it.
One of the things that you talked about today, even in that talking about that honesty, is remembering, and the principle of remembering, which I love. That's what your organization is founded upon.
Yes.
So kind of walk with me through how you guys, how you in your work, how the workplace, how professionals should help families grieve?
I think giving the space to grieve, first of all, is just important. I mean, the actual space at the warm place of just, this is a place where it's safe to come and remember your loved one and talk about your loved one. So that can be the warm place, but also could be for those professionals out there, their counseling office. Like, this is a safe place that you can come and talk about this person that's died, all the emotions that you're experiencing, all the questions that you have, all the memories that you have. The same thing at home, that parents can really create a safe place for their kids to talk about that loved one who died, to just make that a safe place.
Yeah. What do you do with that story when it's hard? So I know that sometimes the kiddos that you've worked with, the families, they've lost a loved one due to hard circumstances. So it hasn't been a natural cause. It hasn't been age. It's been something hard like drug abuse or suicide. How do you navigate that when remembering is hard?
Sure. Suicide, of course, is one of the, I want to say the top 4 causes of death right now. I want to say number 2 cause for ages 10 to 25. I could be wrong on that. We can check the stats.
Yeah.
But it is very high. So we have a lot of families that are coming after the death from suicide.
Yeah.
And so we just encourage them to talk about it as much as they can as a family. We really encourage them to be honest with their kids about what happened, and to answer questions as honestly as they can in an age-appropriate way. But what we have found is when they are not honest and share what's happened, then the kids do find out at some point. And sometimes they already know, and parents think that they don't.
Yeah.
But then when they find out later, they go through grief in a whole new way, because now I'm grieving what actually happened, and I'm grieving that no one around me was telling me the truth, and that I don't have anyone I feel I can trust. So now I really feel alone.
Yeah.
Because all these people haven't been telling me the truth.
That's such a good point. And I think that we see that even in the adoption world, when we have kiddos who have a hard story and families want to protect or buffer or make it shiny and pretty, just like you said today with grief. And so the hard thing about that is that we can't fix it for them. We can't pretty it up. And the worst thing would be if we, the parent, the attachment figure, didn't give them that information. And like you said, they almost would grieve that lack of trust. So I think that's really, it's hard to look at it in the face and speak truth, but also it sounds important.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
definitely.
What are your kind of go-to phrases in grief that are helpful? And that could be for kids or parents.
I think that always I'm saying there's no right way to grieve.
Yeah.
I'm just always saying that because I think all of us are looking for a right way to do it. And we want our children to grieve the right way. And we want to help our friends who've had a loss grieve the right way and fix it. So just that just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's really different for everyone. That there's no timeline for grief. A lot of times you'll hear, well, it's been a year, or it's been 3 days, or whatever it's been. And there just isn't a timeline. There's just, this is a lifelong journey. Grief of learning what my life is going to look like now after this loss. And then I think it's just important to give yourself the space and the time, like you mentioned, to grieve, to really be intentional about that effort of grief work.
I love what you said earlier. Someone asked, how do I parent as I grieve? Especially for our families who have lost a loved one or are even grieving, with adoption, their child's story or experience if they've been removed from a hard situation or lost a parent. And you said, put your oxygen mask on. And I love that. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So that's a saying that we say at the Warm Place as well, is like on airplanes when they say, if the cabin pressure changes, the oxygen masks drop down, put your own on first, and then help, your loved one next to you. And I think that's so true in grief, because often we are so busy helping those around us, especially if we have kids, that we forget to put our own oxygen mask on. And that's a time when our kids need us the most, and they need us to be healthy the most.
Sure.
And they need to see what that looks like to take care of yourself.
Sure.
In the midst of grief. That's really what they're learning from. And so to do that and model that for them is really important.
And I think part of that isn't making it pretty, right? So our oxygen mask isn't 8 to 5, I'm polished, I'm perfect. mommy feels happy.
Sure.
It really can be, I'm having a really hard day and mom's going to go to counseling. And I loved that you said that. And just kind of illustrating, you even said today, modeling for your children how you would want them to grieve,
Sure.
which isn't how we want to do it in our society. We want to make it pretty for them, help support them. But in a way, kind of what you said today was that you teach them through modeling it and through living it, which it's kind of against what I, naturally feel as a parent, but it was really cool to hear you say that and give permission for that.
Sure, definitely.
It was great. What about gratitude? So when I toured your center, there was this beautiful big gratitude wall, and I instantly kind of thought in my mind, well, how do these families experience gratitude? Like you just told me that there's a grief and loss group for pre-K, children. So tell me about why gratitude's important during grief.
I think you find what you're looking for. And I think when we're grieving, to intentionally make yourself look for things that are helpful in your grief journey, for people that are being helpful, for small things that you can be thankful for, really can be a great tool in someone's grief journey, because writing a thank you note to someone who's been helpful, just to acknowledge that someone else is with you. You're not alone. It's just a great reminder of you're not in it by yourself. There's people supporting you, because when we're grieving, our world is so small. We are so overwhelmed, and we're so in the middle of just day to day, minute to minute, things that we need to do. So when we are intentional about being thankful and gratitude, it forces us to look outside of the dark that we're feeling and just find something that we can be thankful for.
That's really beautiful.
It's not easy, for sure, but a lot of our families share that it's very helpful.
My dad recently went through a grief experience, and it was kind of ambiguous loss. But one thing that he did that Cheryl Sandberg talked about in her Option B book, which is super great if anyone needs a resource, she talked about practicing gratitude. And it was 3 things a day that you were grateful for. And his kind of turned into people, which I thought was really interesting. Yes. And so he recently wrote 96 thank you notes of people who showed up and he felt seen by. And so I think that that's even on that, gratitude wall, I saw people's names, and I thought that even if, the day is hard, there was someone who might have shown up for you and saw you and looked at you with acknowledgement. And so I think that's really beautiful that you guys practice that. Yes. But initially it was hard for me to understand, because that's the culture of grief. What is one of your favorite gratitude practices that you've?
I love writing thank you notes. For me, it's just really helpful because, again, it makes you think about what's helpful. I don't get to do it all the time, but there have been times where I've been intentional about trying to write one a day. Yeah. And I feel that difference because, one, you're looking for it. You're looking around saying, who can I write a thank you note to? Yeah. People that maybe you would never even recognize or acknowledge what they have done for you. And even if it's a small thing, it changes your focus to look for that. Yeah. And then the actual act of writing it down and writing specifically what you're thankful for to that person, and then sending that and knowing maybe that's going to brighten their day too, or help them to realize the difference that they're making when maybe they don't realize it. Yeah.
And I mean, in our training today, you asked the group, after you experienced grief, kind of what did you take away from it? And a lot of people said that they felt seen and that they understood people more and that they had more empathy. And so you don't know who's going to get that thank you card. They might need that today.
Yes,
it's really beautiful. I love that. What, how do you talk about grief when it's not death? Because I feel like all the literature, when I went to Barnes and Noble, there's a wall of death books, but there's not a lot of loss. And so what advice do you have, and how do we practice that better?
Sure. Well, at the Warm Place, we only deal with the death loss, but I think people do experience so many losses in our lives, and we do grieve those losses, whether it's moving. I mean, moving is so common, to change jobs, to change schools for kids, new friends, new churches, new, centers of faith, like all those things. You grieve those things that you're losing, even in the midst of, even if it's a positive change. Sure. For adopted kids, that's a huge loss and change. They're definitely going to experience grief when their whole world has changed, and they're going to grieve all those losses of relationships and friendships and things that are comfortable. Even if it wasn't a positive environment, it's still something that's a change.
Absolutely.
How
do you, what guidance would you have for adoptive families? I'm thinking about families who have adopted a child internationally, who may have lost their culture and everything that was familiar, even the taste of their food, or, how they wore their clothing and the type of diaper that they had, or, something as big as, they lost their friends from the orphanage and their caregiver. How would you guide families who are working with a child who is grieving in that way? What tools would you share with them?
I think just providing a time and space to talk about those things, to recognize, maybe even make a list. What are the things that this child has lost? I mean, let's talk about them. Let's write them down. Let's let that child, depending on their age, say them. Like, tell me, what are the things that have changed? What are the losses that you've had? Because sometimes just making that list and seeing it visually can be really helpful. And then to talk about, what do you miss about this? What do you miss about that? Just giving them space to grieve, giving them space to talk about it, and not just being like, but it's so much better now. And look how great this is. Because that, again, is just not acknowledging the reality of the loss and the change that they've had. So giving them that space to acknowledge and talk about it.
I love that. It gives permission for them to share their heart. So I think sometimes we fix it in the way of, well, look how wonderful it is, like you just said, and that's okay, and it can be wonderful. Megan Devine talks a lot about, joy and pain can coexist.
Sure.
And definitely. I think that grief for these children can coexist, that they can be so happy to be in this new safe space, but they can miss their biological mom, and they can miss their orphanage, and they can do all those things together in the same space. And so what you're saying is to kind of acknowledge that and to bring that dialogue into the home, because then it creates a culture of understanding and acceptance.
Sure. And for them to not feel guilty, because I think a lot of times they might feel guilty because if I say I miss this, then maybe you feel like I'm not thankful for you, or I don't love you, or whatever. But like you said, they can coexist. I can miss this and still be thankful for this. I mean, I think about that with our families that maybe had a spouse loss and now are remarried. So there's this guilt of, I'm so glad that I'm with this person, but yet I'm with this person because my spouse died. So there's these mixed emotions there. And same with the kids. I'm so thankful I have, this new parent, but can I really be thankful for that? Because that means that my biological parent died.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of mixed emotions there. And just to say, it's okay to have all those emotions.
And maybe even as a parent, sharing, reflecting back with them what you're hearing them say, and sharing that that's hard for you to hear too. And that, you hope for them, to be able to share that with you again, and just eliciting a space where that's safe for them to use their words and verbalize it. And I think, things like books on the shelf and little conversational starters that can kind of bring that in could be really great for a family to have as a tool too.
Definitely. Yeah. Because those are kind of an easy tool that they can use, and it's an easy conversation starter for sure.
What about birth parents? So at Gladney, we work with women who plan adoption, women and men, and it's almost the same, like we were just saying, the joy and the pain coexist. And with birth parents, absolutely. They've made this beautiful plan. They're so fortunate to be able to have a relationship with the adoptive parents and to trust them and to place their child with them and their home to parent that child. But at the same time, they grieve for what they wish that they had. So how would you say that our culture, our community, our therapists, their parents, their community could do a better job of acknowledging that and helping them through that?
I mean, for them, it is a loss, and I think to, again, give space to talk about that. I think support groups for birth parents are huge, just to normalize all those emotions and all the grief that they experience. And then also to help give those kind of coping tools in the midst of it, but also just to say it's okay. It's okay to be really sad. It's okay to, even if you did the right thing, to really miss that child. That's okay.
What about triggers? You talked about that today. You talked about the smell or the sight of something. And I know that I personally sometimes have been taken aback, and in a moment, at a store or at a, restaurant, something comes over you, with an emotion. What about for birth parents? It's the holiday season.
Sure.
There's a lot of, grief with missing big seasons of life. What would you say that how they could take care of themselves during that time?
I think to actually take care of themselves as far as just getting enough sleep, taking care of your body with rest and food, and in your relationships to just not isolate yourself, but physically taking care of your body is really important, because when we're going through grief and we're going through the holidays, we just can so easily get depleted, and then add on that all the emotions, and it just easily wears us out. So doing the things that, getting exercise, or even if it's just going for a walk for a little bit, just taking care of your body. And then also for the holidays to recognize that it is going to be a difficult time, and it's okay if it's different than normal and you don't do all the traditions that you usually do. It's okay to say no to things, and it's okay to do things differently.
Right.
And that there's nothing wrong with that.
So it might just be the season of, setting really great boundaries, or practicing no when that hasn't been something that you've done before, or saying yes to things maybe you haven't said yes to.
Sure, definitely. Yeah. And being able to communicate that to people and say, I'm just not up for that this year.
And in that way, maybe that person then could check on you. And that no might elicit a checked-in response or a caregiving when maybe someone didn't know that was your experience.
Sure, and even to ask for help. I think that's a huge thing. I think a lot of times people around us want to help, but they just don't know how.
Sure.
So to be able to verbally express, whether it's a birth mom or somebody who's had a death loss, whatever, to express to people outside, hey, this is what I need. And then people are usually more than willing to do that. They just don't know what to do.
Sure. I've even heard that from adopted parents. So when they are bringing a child into their home and they're kind of what we call cocooning, right? They kind of shut down. We're not going to go to church or soccer. We're going to spend time at home bonding and attaching. But even in that season, practicing, we can use help for dinner. We would love transportation to karate. Those things sometimes can be helpful. It's just practicing that ask, which we're not used to or comfortable with.
Sure. Yeah. And I just last night had a family sharing that they were really uncomfortable sharing what they needed with the holidays coming up. But once they did, the response was so affirming for them.
Wow.
And they felt so supported. It was such a pendulum swing for them from feeling so alone to just speaking and saying, hey, this would be really helpful for us. And then it just made such a difference for them for the holidays. And I think that's something that we forget.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. And I'm glad that they felt comfortable using their voice to do that, because that's not our normal.
Right. It's not comfortable.
One of the things I struggle with in grief work in my clinical practice and then in my own personal life is the 5 steps model, which I feel like if you hear the word grief with any kind of research or article online, a lot of times you hear there's 5 steps, and once you get through them, everything's going to be okay.
Sure.
So am I alone in that struggle?
No, I think that's pretty much everybody. I mean, whenever people ask what I do and I tell them, they're like, oh yeah, the 5 steps of, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And I'm like, that is really great research, but that's not always the case for people.
Sure.
And a lot of people go through, every grief journey is unique, because every person is unique, every relationship is unique, every experience. So it's helpful, I think, to know those 5 things, because a lot of people do experience them.
Okay.
And then when they do, they're like, well, at least I'm not crazy. I know, some people do, but not to hold it as this is the standard of what I should experience.
Sure. And so it's almost like understanding the 5 emotions that may come with it, but not saying, okay, once you move through this, you move through this.
Right. It's not
and then you're
sequential or anything.
Yeah, you're headed to the pot of gold at the end of it. So today you talked about a mother that you had worked with recently, and she was talking about her child who she had lost, and she was talking about what her grief experience was like. Can you tell me?
She said, grief is love with nowhere to go.
It's really beautiful.
Thanks for listening to the Reframed podcast. Be sure to visit gladneyuniversity.org to access the show notes and discover upcoming trainings at Gladney University. We love your feedback, so please head to iTunes and rate, review, and subscribe. Until next time.